Hello and welcome to Getaway Day. I am Mason, and not like always, I'm here alone. So Gotham's internet is giving him some fits, so he's not able to join me tonight. But the show must go on. So we are going to be talking about quite a few things tonight. But before we get into that, if you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. If you are following on YouTube, please hit that little notification bell so that you actually do get the notifications whenever we post new content. So on there, you'll find our live podcasts whenever I open baseball cards. I've been trying to upload some of my TikToks onto there, so there's a lot of good stuff there. You can follow us on Apple Podcast, or you can let us know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, or reaching out to us on Facebook, Twitter, or TikTok at Getaway Day Pod. So, yeah, let's get right into it. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of a hodgepodge of things. So Tatis, Drew Rasmussen, Chris Woodward. But the main thing I want to talk about today is actually the Baltimore Orioles. So it's kind of a little rundown of what we're going to do. So, yeah. But first and foremost, some really big news this week from a good friend of the pod, potentially a guest host in the very near future, Ashley Sanders. So she's been on the pod, I think one time so far. But she has taken a rollout with Sony San Diego Studios, who is the developers of MLB The Show. And she's going to be working on the live content team out there. So congratulations, Ashley. Would love to have you back on. We don't have to talk about that because I know there's going to be a lot of NDAs around that. But yeah, so just wanted to say that right up off the top. Now let's get into some of the things that happened in baseball this week. First and foremost, kind of the big news of the week. Fernando Tatis Jr. He was 4 games into his rehab start, or into his rehab progression for the Padres to come back and join a lineup with Juan Soto, Manny Machado, Jake Cronenworth. And this team was really, really looking forward to having him back to make their playoff run. They're currently sitting at 65 and 53, 17 games behind the Dodgers, but in a wild card spot. So they were hoping to get him back, go on a tear, and lock up this wild card spot. And then it was announced by Major League Baseball last week that he's been suspended 80 games for testing positive for, I believe it's pronounced Clostebol, which is an anabolic steroid. And he came out and made a couple of statements about how it was from ringworm medication he took. His dad came out and said that he had a haircut that went awry, ended up being infected by a fungus, used a topical ointment that had Clostebol. He's not a cheater, trying to bring down the public outcry for this, because Fernando Tatis is kind of the guy baseball was building around for the last couple years. The Let the Kids Play movement was all centered around Fernando Tatis Jr. And now he goes out, and this year he missed the first half of the season because he had so he missed the beginning of the season due to a wrist injury he sustained during the offseason when he fell off his motorcycle. That was a really, really big deal and really hurt the Padres' chances this season. Then he comes back and immediately gets suspended for PEDs. He's a 23-year-old kid. Yeah, he's going to be young and dumb, but he needs to start using his head. He is one of the premier baseball players in the league. And to sit there and say, well, I used a medicine for ringworm, I'm not cheating, this isn't a big deal, I shouldn't be suspended 80 games. You used a banned substance, straight up. take your punishment, move on, and let's just try and do better in the future. But this is now two big things that he's done in the same year to just show that he's not very mature, I guess, at this point. He's a pro athlete. Like, he knows that the stakes are that high. He got what, a 13-year, $325 million contract or something before this year. Like, a team is willing to give him that much money to play a sport for his career. And he'd probably get another contract after that one. And he's made two boneheaded decisions, and he's trying to pass the blame off on something else. You messed up, kid. You should know what you put in your body. You're a professional athlete. This is a substance that is banned by WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency. That's a really big deal. People get kicked out of the Olympics for this one. This is not like a steroid that's in your inhaler. It's not the same. And this is a really, really big deal, just kind of in general, because, like, yeah, he's suspended 80 games. That's going to be big for the Padres' postseason chances this year. But on top of that, he is suspended through the playoffs. He is going to be suspended through the beginning of next season. He is ineligible for the World Baseball Classic. So he's this one transgression, if you will, has a whole lot of implications that we don't even see yet. So I don't know. I've been hearing a lot of conversations about this, and you could get into the conversation about, does this preclude him from the Hall of Fame? Based on the way voters are saying right now, maybe. I expect voters to kind of change their mind over time, start like looking at PEDs a little bit more situationally by player, and maybe letting in some guys and not others. But at the same time, he's 23 years old. Hall of Fame is not a lock, even for a guy of his talent level. We've seen guys that have had fantastic first 5, 6, 7 years of their career and then flame out. Those guys don't make it into the Hall of Fame. I'm not saying Tatis is going to be that guy, because I do think he is a generational talent. I think this guy is on a Hall of Fame track, and this could potentially, in the future, prevent him from getting in if he has the career we all expect him to. And yeah, AJ Preller was pissed at Tatis for this. We saw how mad he was at the beginning of the season with the motorcycle incident, but he's, I don't know, he's incredibly disappointed in the face of his franchise and the potential face of baseball. And he should be. And honestly, we all should be. We should hold the athletes that our kids look up to a higher standard, and they should realize we hold them to a higher standard. Maybe he didn't intend to cheat here, but he did something that was strictly against the rules of not only baseball, but the World Anti-Doping Agency. You got to be smart. Period. End of story. So, I'm going to do more ranting about a different topic here at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and move on from Tatis. But I would love to hear you guys' takes on this. So let us know on Facebook, Twitter, anywhere you reach out to us. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So, but yeah, point Gotham's making here in the chat. Tatis was doing a really good job of changing baseball for the better. He was kind of one of the first guys to make baseball not the boring old man sport that it has been for years. I think we've talked on this pod. Gotham and I are kind of part of a small group of our generation that actually watches baseball. Watches baseball religiously and actually cares about it. It's been starting to grow because of guys like Tatis, Ronald Acuna, Juan Soto, and now Tatis taking himself out of the picture. I'm got to make sure I phrase this so it's putting the blame solely on him, because this is his fault. It's no one else's. He should have known what he put in his body. It's not really much else to say there. But yeah, so hopefully these other guys can continue changing the game for the better. And this is not a transgression that affects everything. But we'll see. So, all right. So, on a much lighter topic, we had another young guy this week do something really pretty phenomenal. And that is Drew Rasmussen, starting pitcher of the Tampa Bay Rays. So he went out on Sunday against the Baltimore Orioles and he put up, let's see, where did I put his line? So for the first 8 innings of the game, he had thrown 8 perfect innings on 79 pitches. That is phenomenal. Drew Rasmussen, or he went back out for the 9th. And he gave up a double to Jorge Mateo with the first AB of the 9th inning. It was just barely fair, just squeaked over the third base bag. And it was a really, really well hit ball. Like, it wasn't really a missed pitch. It was just well struck by Mateo. The dude's really fast. There was no shot. Ruined his perfect game and his no hitter, but he still had the chance to go out there and throw a Maddox a complete game shutout in under 100 pitches. He ended up getting a ground out on of the next batter. Mateo advanced to third. There was then a wild pitch. Mateo scored, and then Drew Rasmussen was pulled. So he ended up finishing, or his final line was 8 1/3 innings on 1 hit, 1 earned run, 7 strikeouts on 87 pitches. So 8 1/3 and 87 pitches. That's phenomenal. And I went and I was just kind of curious because, like, Drew Rasmussen is not a guy who goes out and throws a lot of innings. On the season, he's thrown 99 2/3 innings over 20 starts. He's averaging less than 5 innings a game. And I was curious if that was him just not being very efficient, if he was getting pulled early, kind of what the deal was. So I went back and started looking at his pitches by game. And his 87 pitches here is, or in this game, was basically tied for the 4th most pitches he's thrown in a game this year. He's thrown 97 one time, 94 one other time, and he has not eclipsed 90 pitches in any other game. He's only pitched over 6 innings twice, including Sunday. The other was actually all the way back on June 4th when he threw 7 3-hit, no-run innings against the White Sox in a 3-2 loss. So he's not a guy that gets to go very deep. So the fact that Kevin Cash let him go out there for not only the 7th or the 6th inning, the 7th inning, the 8th inning, but letting him go back in the 9th when he's kind of at that pitch count where you pull him, that was really cool to me because the Rays are always really careful with their young pitchers. They don't want to get them hurt. They kind of want to just manage innings and play baseball the smart way and not the fun way. So getting to see Drew Rasmussen go out for the 9th inning was really, really fun, even though he did end up giving up the double to Mateo there in the first at bat of the inning. But yeah, he's the ultimate 5 and dive guy. He's actually had a game where he only threw 33 pitches and then he was pulled. And that was back on the 7th of August. So kudos to Drew Rasmussen. I really, really hope we could see more of that from him. He's been a really, really solid pitcher this year, kind of in general. In 99 2/3 innings, he's rocking a 2.80 ERA, a 3.36 FIP. And he's been really solid. And this is a guy that's had Tommy John 2 times. So having your elbow basically reconstructed twice, it makes sense why they try and limit his pitch count. So kudos to Kevin Cash for letting him try and go out there and get the perfect game, because this is a team where combined perfect games, combined no hitters, that's kind of the thing they try and do. They don't really let one guy go out and rock it unless it's Blake Snell, and even then you pull him a little too early and then you lose a World Series. But I didn't say that out loud. All right. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all we got for Drew Rasmussen. So moving on to another American League team over in the West. So the Texas Rangers have relieved Chris Woodward of his duties here this week. He is the fourth manager of the season to be fired mid-season. Chris Woodward has been around since 2019. He took over prior to the beginning of the season, and he's not really had the best tenure. He's he has a 212 and 287 record over the course of 4 years for the Texas Rangers. He did have a 100-loss season last year in 2021, but really that's not his fault. The team's been rebuilding for years. They've been pretty open about it. And so he didn't really have the best situation to have a winning club. That being said, like, he's not a manager you really hear much about, good or bad. He's just kind of there. I really couldn't tell you any like blasphemously bad calls he's made as a manager. Really, the only thing I can point to say if he's doing good or not is basically that every year his overturn percentage on challenges has been going down, and it was 33% this year. So not great there. But after he was fired, the GM of the Rangers came out and gave a really long statement and basically said this. So, quote, "We've had extensive discussions over the last several weeks, and while the team's current performance is certainly a big part of the decision, we're also looking at the future. As the Rangers continue to develop a winning culture and put the pieces together to compete for the postseason year in and year out, we felt a change in leadership was necessary at this time." End quote. So basically, what they're saying is Chris Woodward was their rebuild guy. He was not really going to be the long-term option, I don't think, ever. And so at this point, I think they're looking at going to a more mature, established manager to go with this team that is honestly up and coming. They went out and spent big money this offseason on guys like Marcus Semien, Corey Seager, John Gray. And so they're starting to set the expectation that they're going to attempt to be good. And they do have some really young prospects who are incredibly promising. But yeah, so we'll have to see what their move is going to be. At this point, there's a whole bunch of teams that are going to be vying for managers, and it's really hard to say what's going to happen because I can't really think of too many established good managers are out there right now. Is like the guys that have been released, Joe Girardi, Joe Madden, oh shoot, who's the other one? I can't remember the other one. But they're not guys that I think at this point you want to go out and sign if you're expecting your club to be really good. And so unless they could poach somebody like the Cubs did, Charlie Montoyo. Yeah, he was the other one, Blue Jays. But yeah, so the Blue Jays kind of have their guy locked up in John Schneider, I think. So that takes one guy off the market and one team out of it. But who does that really leave? Bruce Bochy would be a really good get for this team, I think. But he doesn't really seem like he wants to come out of retirement. So I don't know. I'm really curious to see what you guys' thoughts are on who might be available and who might fill these roles well. Because it feels like we're going to be getting some first-time skippers this year, as we always do. But curious to see how those turn out. All right. So that is kind of everything that has happened this week that I've wanted to talk about here. So I want to move on and talk a little bit about the Baltimore Orioles. So Gautam and I have been talking a lot about the Orioles here over the last couple weeks. This is a team that's been incredibly confusing because this is a team that has lost 100 games 3 times in the last 4 years. The only reason it wasn't 4 for 4 was it was the shortened 2020 season. This year they're above 500. They're fourth place in the American League East, and they haven't done anything intentionally to improve. So it's just it's mind-boggling to me. And so, kind of looking through what this club has been doing, I wanted to give a little bit of historical context to the Orioles and try and make that connection between their past, their present, and what I suspect is their future. So the Baltimore Orioles actually began as the St. Louis Browns. Well, technically they began as the Milwaukee Brewers back in 1899, something like that. Long time ago. Played one season in Milwaukee, moved to St. Louis, became the Browns, played there until 1953. In 1954, Gerald Hofberger bought the team and he got permission to move them from St. Louis to Baltimore and rename them the Orioles. In their first season in Baltimore, they kind of set the tone for what we know of the Orioles, going 54-100. So it took them exactly one season to get their first 100-loss season. If that's not the most Orioles thing you've ever heard, I really don't know what is. But 4 years later, they finally got their first winning record as the Baltimore Orioles in 1960. They continued to improve from there. They won the World Series in 1966. Then they returned to the World Series in 1969, won the series again in 1970, and went back for a third trip in 3 years, where they ultimately lost to the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1971 to that Roberto Clemente team. So then 9 years later, Gerald Hofberger sold the team to Edward Bennett Williams in 1979. And then 4 years later, they actually won their third World Series behind the likes of Cal Ripken Jr., Eddie Murray, and Jim Palmer. So they had some really, really good teams early on in their history. And then everything started to fall apart. So the Orioles were just really not all that good from 84 to 89 under Edward Bennett Williams. And he then sold the team to Eli Jacobs in 1989. Eli Jacobs only owned the team for 4 years before he sold it to the current owner, Peter Angelos, in 1993. So now we start getting into kind of this modern era of the Orioles. Since 1983, so going back into that Edward Bennett Williams, Eli Jacobs, and Peter Angelos tenures altogether, the Orioles have only posted 12 winning seasons in 39 years. That is not good at all. They've only made the playoffs 5 times. They have won 3 series and I believe 1 wild card game. And they have not made a World Series since 1983. Then you go and look at some of the best players that they've ever had. And you look at guys like Brooks Robinson, Cal Ripken Jr., Frank Robinson, Jim Palmer, and Eddie Murray. All these guys that whenever you think of the Orioles and the Orioles being good, those are the guys you think of. They're the 5 numbers that are retired, along with manager of the 60s and 70s, Earl Weaver. Well, that's kind of the epitome of Orioles baseball being good. Brooks Robinson and Frank Robinson played from 1955 to 1977. And then Eddie Murray comes in the 70s. Jim Palmer debuts in the 60s. He plays into the 80s. Eddie Murray debuts in the 70s. He plays into the late 90s. Cal Ripken Jr. debuts in 1981, plays until 2001. And then they kind of just fall off the face of the earth. So I was curious about that. And so I went and looked at some of the best seasons of Orioles players. And so if you're looking at the WAR statistic, it's an all-encompassing statistic that does a pretty decent job of representing the value of a player. So if you're looking at Fangraphs, they kind of give just a rough estimate of like how to interpret WAR. So player that's between 0 and 1 is just kind of a scrub player. 1 to 2 WAR is a role player, so on and so forth, through solid, good, all-star. And then superstar level players kind of start around that 5 WAR cutoff. And so I went and looked, and since Cal Ripken retired in 2001, there have been only 14 seasons of players posting a 5 or higher WAR. Out of those 14 seasons, I believe it was only 9 different players that were able to eclipse that 5 WAR period, meaning in 22 years, they've had essentially 9 superstars. But that list is not really who you would expect. Yes, last year, Cedric Mullins broke out for the Baltimore Orioles. He put up a 5.7 WAR season. It was really good. But 3 of the seasons were Manny Machado, who now plays for the San Diego Padres. 2 of those seasons were Brian Roberts, who retired back in like 2009-ish. 2 of those seasons were Miguel Tejada. So we've not had a lot of recent successful Baltimore players who were consistently good, and we certainly don't have any that are still there, with the exception of Cedric Mullins. So that kind of was just driving me into looking at the different GM tenures, if you will. So from 2011 until 2018, Dan Duquette was in charge of running the team. Under Dan Duquette, the team actually did make 3 postseasons and posted a 635 and 661 overall record. During that time, the Orioles were pretty active in the free agent market and trying to improve their team on basically a yearly basis. So under Dan Duquette, you saw the Orioles go out and try to improve the team by getting guys like, all right, I don't have enough screens here. He went out and got Nelson Cruz on a 1-year, $8 million deal back in 2014. Nelson Cruz had a really, really good season for them that year. He went out and signed Ubaldo Jimenez for 4 years, $50 million back in 2014. That one ended up being kind of an albatross contract. Ubaldo was not that great with the Padres, and to be honest, I'm not really sure if he even finished that contract. I would have to go look. But the big one here was Chris Davis, who got a 7-year, $161 million contract that the team is still paying, and Chris Davis has not played for them since last year. So the Dan Duquette years, he tried putting a lot of money into the team and improving the team, and they did make 3 postseasons. But towards the end of that run, whenever you saw guys like Ubaldo and Chris Davis kind of tail off, the team couldn't sustain paying for good players to keep that team up, and went into this rebuild that we've seen now with the multiple 100-loss seasons. So it's really hard to, or really weird to say, but the GM that seems to have put the team in the best spot to succeed is also the GM who's put them in the worst spot moving forward. Because he went all in on trying to win a World Series in 2012, 2014, 2016. And all they really had to show for it was an NLCS appearance in 2014, where they got swept by the Kansas City Royals, who went on to lose to the San Francisco Giants in the World Series. Yeah, so then we move into the Mike Elias tenure. In 2019, Peter Angelos and the Angelos family finally decided that Dan Duquette was not cutting it anymore. And the same with, oh, shoot. Now I'm blanking on his name. The on-field manager that is now the manager of the New York Mets. Name will come to me shortly. Keep wanting to say Earl Weaver, but it's not. He retired in the 70s. But anyway, so the Orioles moved on from the Dan Duquette years and brought in Mike Elias, who had been underneath Jeff Luhnow over in Houston. So Elias came in. They also brought in their first analytics guy, and they started their analytics group in 2018. They were the last team to implement an analytics department. Buck Showalter. Thank you. Yeah. Kind of embarrassed. That one slipped my mind there. But yeah, so Mike Elias comes in 2019, along with the implementation of an analytics department, and the team went into full-on rebuild mode. They've picked in the top 3 picks in the draft every year, basically, since he's been in it. And they've drafted some really, really good players. They drafted Adley Rutschman. They drafted Jackson Holliday this year. I believe Gunnar Henderson. And they've had some really good drafts. However, you start looking at the on-field product, and Mike Elias was the exact opposite of Dan Duquette. So Dan Duquette would spend money on these big-time free agents trying to make the Orioles a perennial contender in the American League East. Mike Elias is probably one of the stingiest guys that I've seen as far as a GM is concerned. In 4 years, he has spent, let me see if I could add it up pretty quickly here. He has spent about $12 million on free agents. And that's about it. None of those contracts have been multi-year contracts. Only 2 of them even had a club option. The first one of those being Jose Iglesias, who was signed for $3 million in 2020 and had a club option that was not picked up. And then the second one being Jordan Lyles, who signed this year for $7 million and has, I believe, an $11 million club option. So that's the extent of the free agents that Mike Elias has really gone out to sign. I mean, the other notable guys that they spent a little bit of money on are Freddie Galvis and Robinson Chirinos. However, after the trade deadline this year, which saw the Orioles ship off Jorge Lopez and Trey Mancini for 6 prospect pitchers, Mike Elias came out and said, quote, "While I'm super excited about 2022 and what's ahead of us, our chances, we're going to continue with the plan of building for this bright, long future in the American League East. I think we're right there. I think it's liftoff from here for this team. This is a decade-long window that I think is opening up, and I couldn't be more excited about it for Baltimore and for the Orioles and for these guys. It was the most important thing to us that we prioritize this long window that we feel is ahead of us among all other considerations. We're going to be signing players this winter. I'm very excited about it." So this GM, who is not given a single multi-year contract, has not gone out and got a premier free agent, is setting some pretty lofty expectations of going out and spending money and trying to build a contender here. And I really hope he upholds his promise there, because Orioles fans do not deserve more 100-loss seasons. No team deserves that. It kind of, a 100-loss season in baseball, while yes, you're still winning 50 to 60 games, just kind of feels like the 0-16 Detroit Lions, the 0-16 Cleveland Browns. And no team deserves that. So before you start promising a 10-year championship window, you kind of got to have a winning season first. And then after that, then you got to make the playoffs. There's some baby steps here that you got to take. You got to walk before you can run. And he's not shown as a GM that he can walk yet. He's not signed a free agent to 2 years. Why? I don't know. It, I don't know if ownership is being incredibly stingy. It probably is. It's Major League Baseball. The owners don't seem to want to spend the money that they have. But before we start talking about a 10-year window, let's go out and sign some guys. There's some guys on the market this year that would be really, really good to build around. I mean, you have you have four different shortstops, like premier shortstops on the market. Go get one. Jorge Mateo's their shortstop right now. Jorge Mateo is a great number 9 hitter on a championship team. He should not be the best player on your team like he is in 2022. So go out and sign a Carlos Correa. Go out and sign a Dansby Swanson. Go get one of these younger shortstops that you can bring all your young prospects up around to build a playoff contending team. They are in a wild card spot right now. I say that. Let me double check that because could have changed here in the last couple days. They are 1.5 games back of a wild card right now. So they're still definitely in this. Behind Seattle, Tampa Bay, and Toronto. So they have a shot at making the playoffs. The team is not that good. So if they do, I would be incredibly shocked. But I feel like the worst thing that Baltimore can do is to look at this team that is 60-55 right now and say, see, I told you we're good. We're only going to make some minor upgrades to this team and continue on with that moving forward. Because while they're 5 games above 500, they only have a +9 run differential. That doesn't really scream 5 games above 500. Their pitching is just kind of flat out awful. They're rocking a rotation of Gordon Lyles, who is likely a free agent if they do not pick up the $11 million option they have on him. Spencer Watkins, Kyle Bradish, Dean Kremer, and Austin Voth. And they're all really, I don't want to say young because Spencer Watkins is 30 years old, but they're all really low service time guys. They have a lot of control left, but none of them are one of these generational pitching talents. So I would really, really like to see them go out and figure out how to address this lack of pitching depth. They did a pretty good job starting that at the trade deadline this year by getting back 6 pitchers, including a pretty solid prospect in left-handed pitcher Cade Povich from the Minnesota Twins. But that's a long ways from building a perennial contender. So yeah, so there's a lot of pitchers that are going to be on the market this year, and maybe we'll see Mike Elias go spend some money there. But yeah, Gotham here in the chat is bringing up a really good point. So this Orioles team has had a lot of trouble keeping the ball in the park in the past couple of years, and they did actually modify the fence out in left field to basically push it back about an extra 30 feet. And it has taken a field that has been incredibly homer friendly and turned it into basically the most pitcher friendly park in baseball. If you're looking at park factors. So that could definitely help, but it's still not enough to move the wall if you have a whole bunch of these young pitchers who aren't really the cream of the crop, if you will. And if you look at the top prospects for the Baltimore Orioles, there's not a whole lot of pitchers there either. Grayson Rodriguez is a phenomenal young pitcher. I don't think he's debuted. I'm questioning myself. So he's their number 2 prospect in the organization, and he's going to be really, really, really good. I believe he was like the number 3 overall. He was the number 11 overall pick in 2018. But in their top 10, DL Hall is really the only other pitcher that they've got, and he just made his debut this weekend. Sorry. So DL Hall made his debut this weekend. Got optioned back down to the minors right after that. I believe the plan is for him to come back up and pitch out of the bullpen for the rest of the season. So we're kind of seeing their first or their two biggest pitching prospects relatively soon. But then there's not a whole lot of reserves behind that. On the hitting side, they have a phenomenal outlook in their farm system. Guys like Gunnar Henderson, Colton Cowser, Kobe Mayo, Jordan Westberg. All these guys are really young players who have been drafted here in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And they're all going to be coming up here in about the next 2 years, 2, 3 years. So if you can time building a rotation and a bullpen that can support some of these young players as they come up and start breaking into the league, I think they have a really good shot at getting back to at least what we saw in those Dan Duquette years, making the playoffs 3 times in 5 years. Granted, they never went in back-to-back years, which is one of the biggest, biggest downsides to the Duquette years is there just didn't really seem to be consistency with the team. Now, that being said, the years that they didn't make the playoffs, they weren't bad. They were just bouncing between mid 90s win teams and a low 80s. And so whenever they hit that low 80s, they would fall to third in the division, miss out on the wild card spot. But now they're starting to build a team that is a lot younger than that 2012, 2014, 2016 team. They have all these really good young prospects, and the guy who I haven't even mentioned yet that is basically the cornerstone of this rebuild is Adley Rutschman. I believe in Gautam in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was someone explaining with the prospect grades that Adley was graded a 70 overall prospect because they just didn't feel like a catcher should be an 80 grade. But if anyone was an 80 grade, it was going to be Adley. Does that sound about like what was stated at the time when he was drafted? Wait for his response here. But yeah, Adley is a generational talent, and he has been off to a really, really, really good start here this year. He is actually leading the team in WAR in only 280 plate appearances. He has 2.8 FWAR this year. Cedric Mullins, who has almost double the plate appearances as Adley, is down at 2.3. Adley is definitely on a superstar level this year. If you're going by that 5 to 6 WAR is considered a superstar, and 6+ is considered an MVP candidate. He's right there with it. Adley is not really hitting for average this year so far, but through 68 games, he's hitting for 246, 354, 428, with 6 home runs at the majors and a 13.2% walk rate and a 17.9% K rate. So he has a really great eye. He takes a lot of walks. He doesn't strike out all that much. We're going to see him in real time develop that hit tool and that power tool that he graded out as a 70 overall, according to Fangraphs with. Just for reference, when at the beginning of this season, when they did their prospect evaluations again, they graded him out as a future 60 hit, 55 game power. and him at a current of 45 in both. So they're expecting to see a lot of growth even here at the major league level for Adley Rutschman, which kind of puts in the Buster Posey category. Because if you look at Buster Posey's numbers, which I don't have pulled up in front of me right now, but Buster Posey's career numbers, a 302 average with a 460 slug, 158 home runs over the course of 12 years. And like he's probably, outside of Johnny Bench, the best offensive catcher that we've seen in a very, very long time, if not ever. In my personal opinion, it's Joe Mauer, Johnny Bench, and Buster Posey, and Adley looks like he's right there in that group. Adley's walk rate is better than Buster's. His K rate a little bit worse, but I mean, he's still incredibly young. He's only 24 years old. So we've got a superstar in the making right now for the Baltimore Orioles, a whole bunch of prospects on the way, and a GM who is saying verbally that they're going to go out and start spending this year. I'm going to read this part again here, but quote, "We're going to be signing players this winter. I'm very excited about it." End quote. Mike Elias, if you really care about your franchise, your fan base, you will live up to those words. This is a really good free agent class at a few very key positions. There's some good pitchers on the market. Yes, some of them are a bit older, and guys like Justin Verlander, who, let's be real, Verlander's probably not going to want to finish his career with the Orioles, so he's probably out. But you're going to have guys like Carlos Rodon. You're going to have shortstops on the market like Dansby, like Trey Turner, like Carlos Correa, like Xander Bogaerts. There's a lot of options to go out there, spend money, improve your team quickly to build around Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, all these really young, incredibly talented players. So I've kind of been all over the place here in this little rant about the Orioles, but I want to go back to a couple of key points. So one, the Orioles' kind of history has been a bit of an up and down. The first 30 years of their existence in Baltimore was really, really solid. They won 3 World Series. They went to 5 World Series. They had let's see if I can find it here. They had a combined record of 2,610 and 2,111. So they were about 500 games above 500 in their first 30 seasons. Then since 1983, in the last, 40 years? 40 years. 28, 33, and 32 or 63. So 400 games below 500. And so this is a franchise that has seen a great run of historical players, generational talents, World Series wins, and then has been basically one of the most losingest franchises ever since. Baltimore fans really don't deserve that. They have a fantastic outlook because of how bad they've been in the last couple of years. Since 2018, they've had, I think, 2 number 1 overall picks, a number 2 overall pick, number 11 overall pick. Like, they've had some really high draft picks. Now it's time to start turning these picks and all of this money that you've been saving into wins. Hopefully they can go on this 10-year championship window that Mike Elias seems to think they've got. But to do it, you got to go out and get Carlos Carlos Correa. Josh Bell is another guy who's going to be a free agent this year, and now that Trey Mancini's been moved out, like there's an opening at first base here. Yes, Ryan Mountcastle is playing over at first base right now, and he's another guy that I actually just forgot to mention in this little thing entirely. But Ryan Mountcastle, in his third year in the big leagues, is a really kind of underrated player there at first base. He's not really shown the power that he's got the potential to have. But at 25 years old, he's put up 16 home runs on the year in 100 games. He's been an above average hitter, though not by much. He's put up 1 WAR and been pretty solid defensively for a first baseman. So with some of these young guys, I think they would complement really well with a lot of the free agents on the market. So, yeah. Trying to think if I had anything else to talk about. I think that pretty well does it for me. Thank you very much for listening to me rant. This is my first ever solo pod, so please give me feedback on it. I would love to know your thoughts. So make sure that if you enjoyed this podcast or any of our other podcast episodes, that you subscribe on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, really anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find us. And if you can't, reach out to me directly and I'll figure out how to get there. On YouTube, make sure to hit that notification bell. That way you actually get notifications whenever we post new content, be it baseball cards, the podcast, some YouTube shorts, things like that. You can let us know your thoughts through the YouTube comments, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, or by reaching out to us on Twitter or Facebook at Getaway Day Pod. We do also have a TikTok that I have been starting to use a bit more regularly here. I have a couple of really good videos here for this week, so you guys should definitely check out the TikTok. So that is it for me tonight. We will be back here next week on our normal Wednesday. Gautam is actually not going to be here for the next 2 weeks either, as he's going to be going on a family trip. So I'm going to do my best to get us some guest hosts so that you don't have to just listen to me ramble on for multiple weeks in a row. We'll improve on this and do it again sometime though, because this has been fun for me. But yeah, so we'll see you back here, and check out the social media to see who's going to be guest hosting with me. So thank you and have a great rest of your night.